how are your beliefs different than what they believe in terms of like what women want, what is attraction?
Okay, so if we're going to look at what attraction actually is, it is actually neurotransmitters that get released in the brain, both in females and males.
Mm-hmm.
But in the route to get them released are different between men and women. You see? So there have been a lot of research made in this topic. And specifically now in the later years, we have been able to use neural imaging, also functional MRIs and so on, to really measure the release of neurotransmitters, to really determine that the theories that have been studying since 1950s is actually valid today. And what we have seen now, for example, is that when men are seeing beautiful women, their brain releases strong amount of neurotransmitters strongly connected with attraction, sexual attraction, bonding, and love itself. We're now talking about dopamine, endorphins, serotonin, and oxytocin. They did the same study with women. And what do you think they saw in the neural imaging? Nothing. Almost nothing happened when women saw beautiful men. Okay. Also, when they saw men, they also experimented. They wanted to make it more complex. So they actually put men in powerful positions. Like men that were not only handsome, but they look like they are in a high status area, such as work, for example, like they are a doctor, they are someone who has been successful in the business industry and so on. And yet it didn't trigger them much. The only thing they saw was a small release of dopamine. And that was an indicator of interest only, that she might want to know more about him. But there was nothing like how men felt when they saw something attractive. It was just sick comparison, really. So what is then my belief that we can do as men when it comes to attraction? Well, we have to look at what element actually triggered attraction in women, the real elements. And there is another study that has been made. A lot of studies have been made by universities all over the world. But Harvard made a very interesting study, Harvard University Cognitive Lab. So what they did was to measure the neurotransmitters release in female brains in communication. So they actually did it in two ways. One way was when women were listening to something very interesting, an interesting storyteller, an interesting joker, like a comedian, and so on. And what they saw in the female brain was a small release of dopamine, almost the same as what they saw in women when they saw beautiful men. Not so much happened there. But then they made vice versa. It's like we're asking the questions to women instead and let them talk about what they think about things and about themselves in depth. It was not until then when they saw a huge spike of neurotransmitters in the same way as what men saw when they saw beautiful women. So we could replicate that effect when women were talking about themselves, but have to be in a certain depth. It wasn't exactly as strong, but the exposure of those neurotransmitters was very stable and could even increase with time. So now we're getting somewhere when it comes to attraction. What actually triggers attraction in women? And that is very, very interesting. So the answer to your question is, that is what I believe in, because that is what we have been proven triggers attraction in women. In contrast to routine-based game or scripted game or something like that, where we're taking a lot of external factors to trigger attraction in women. It doesn't really work that way. We have to trigger attraction internally. And we're doing that with interpersonal communication.
Would you say that's another way to say that women like men that are charming?
Yeah. You could say that. You could say that. But when you look at charisma and being charming, it involves more than one-liner most of the time.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, I mean, if we look at the charisma code and being charming and so on, it's much more about how a man can make a woman feel in conversations and interactions rather than trying to say something funny, taking out of thin air. Absolutely. So that is what I believe is a huge factor.
I've seen men date women very out of their league looks wise, but they're funny or charming. I could see that.
Yeah.
I could totally see that.
Absolutely. I mean, there is not so big difference. And now I think a lot of people from the red pill community is going to scream now. But there is not so big difference between being pretty average, dating women, and being someone who is pretty handsome and dating women. We're not talking about the homeless person living on the street here. We're talking about a pretty good, decent looking guy, comparing that with someone who's really handsome and who is being successful in something, compared with the average man with a pretty average job. The difference between those two can be huge if none of them know how to communicate with women. But if both of them could communicate with women, the difference between those two become like almost equal.